A AWS é a plataforma de nuvem mais abrangente e amplamente utilizada do mundo. Organizações de todo tipo e tamanho utilizam a AWS para reduzir os custos, ficar mais ágeis e inovar mais rapidamente. A AWS fornece serviços tecnológicos sob demanda através da internet, com pagamento conforme o seu consumo. A AWS oferece mais serviços e mais funcionalidades do que qualquer outro fornecedor de nuvem. Isso faz com que ela seja mais rápida e fácil e tenha um melhor custo-benefício para migrar as suas aplicações para a nuvem e para criar qualquer coisa que possa imaginar. Com a maior comunidade de clientes em todos os setores de mercado, a AWS tem uma experiência incomparável e uma expertise em que você pode confiar para as suas aplicações mais importantes nos mais diversos e imagináveis tipos de uso.
Olá, bom dia a todos, sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Vamos dar início à ABES Conference 2022. Muito bom receber vocês aqui nesse evento realizado em parceria com o portal The Shift, em que vamos falar sobre transformação digital. Eu me chamo Fernanda Estica, vou passar o dia todo aqui com vocês. Eu já estive com vocês na conferência do ano passado, mas a gente se viu através das telas. Estou muito feliz de estar aqui agora de perto. Tenho certeza que muita gente aqui também está feliz de voltar aos eventos presenciais, de poder se ver de perto, se abraçar, rever os amigos, os colegas, fazer networking. Muito bom, muito obrigada pela presença de vocês aqui hoje. Mas o evento continua sendo transmitido online, ao vivo, tem muita gente nos acompanhando de casa, do escritório, então vocês também sejam bem-vindos aí de longe, muito obrigada pela companhia. Muito obrigada aos nossos patrocinadores, AWS e TOTUS, e muito obrigada também a todos os nossos apoiadores. A gente tem hoje aqui uma programação riquíssima, vamos falar muito sobre tecnologia, inovação, sustentabilidade, governança, sobre gente, sobre muitos outros temas super relevantes. Antes de começar as nossas palestras, as nossas mesas redondas, eu tenho alguns recadinhos importantes aqui para vocês. Vocês podem conferir essa programação toda através do nosso aplicativo, é o Media Code, ele está disponível para download nas lojas iOS e Android. Baixem lá, pessoal, vale a pena para vocês acompanharem toda a programação do dia e também fotos, notícias. Falando em notícias, a gente está também durante o dia todo nas redes sociais acompanhando o evento. A ABES tem perfis no Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter, no LinkedIn. Se vocês ainda não seguem a gente, podem seguir, acompanhar o que a gente vai postar ao longo do dia. A gente quer acompanhar vocês também. Se vocês forem postar, usem a hashtag ABES Conference, marquem esses nossos perfis que a gente quer entrar lá, comentar, curtir, dar like. Vamos juntos no dia de hoje também nas redes sociais. Bom, nós vamos ter alguns palestrantes internacionais no dia de hoje, então nós temos à disposição tradução simultânea, os equipamentos estão naquela mesa lá no fundo, à direita de vocês, quem quiser pode ir lá buscar. Vocês podem ver pela programação no aplicativo, quando houver palestrantes internacionais, eu vou avisando também. Já adianto que a primeira palestra é com um palestrante internacional, já, daqui a pouquinho. E mais um recadinho. Não, o recado é isso por enquanto. O tema central da nossa conferência de 2022 é O Digital Sem Fronteiras, o MAPA e o TERRENO mudaram. O que é que isso significa? Nós temos uma programação hoje recheada de palestrantes sensacionais que vão trazer respostas a essa questão. Antes disso, eu convido ao palco para fazer a abertura oficial do evento, dar as boas-vindas a vocês, o presidente da ABES, Paulo Roque.
Bom dia a todos, obrigado por terem vindo. Esse é o primeiro evento presencial depois da pandemia, depois de alguns anos. Falando em pandemia, para quem não se sentir confortável e ficar sem máscara, temos bastante máscaras espalhadas por aí e álcool também, tá? Falar um pouco sobre a ABES, mas antes eu quero dar um aviso para vocês que nós temos uma equipe de apoiadores aí fora, no nosso estande, com pessoas da área comercial e da área de apoio aos associados, que podem mostrar a vocês todas as novas atividades que a ABES está fazendo e como vocês podem se beneficiar mais da associação que vocês têm com a ABES. Nós temos muitos serviços novos para os associados e eu acho que vale a pena conferir, tá? A ABES é uma entidade que tem 36 anos. Hoje nós representamos cerca de 2.000 empresas. Essas empresas são responsáveis por 85% do faturamento de software no Brasil. Não é pouca coisa, é bastante. Cerca de 80 bilhões de reais, né? Nós estamos presentes em 24 estados brasileiros e também no Distrito Federal. Nós geramos 210 mil empregos diretos, é bem diferente de emprego indireto, tá? Os serviços que a gente tem para a comunidade são, principalmente a gente se preocupa com promover a segurança jurídica e tributária. Nós sabemos que no nosso setor, o problema, como nós somos uma área pioneira, a parte tributária, a parte de fiscal, ela normalmente tem interpretações que vão aparecendo, surpresas, a gente tem uma caixa de surpresa. Muitas vezes a gente está pensando que um determinado forma de pagamento, seja para remessa de direito autoral, seja para faturamento de software ou software como serviço na nuvem, por exemplo, aluguel de software, é taxado de um jeito e muitas vezes a gente é surpreendido com decisões da Receita Federal ou do governo, seja estadual, federal, municipal, entendendo diferentes, tem acontecido inclusive recentemente, e não só isso, aplicando esse entendimento aos últimos 5 anos, o que gera uma fragilidade. Nós somos muito ativos em trazer propostas proativas para o governo, principalmente o governo federal que trata disso, para que a gente tenha mais segurança jurídica, né? E temos sido muito bem-sucedidos, né? A parte do ICMS e do ISS, no pagamento de software, que beneficiou tremendamente as empresas, a gente teve uma participação muito grande apresentando argumentações a respeito, tá? A gente quer promover e promove a facilidade de se fazer negócio. Nós queremos nós somos uma entidade política, obviamente, regulatória, porque a gente atua na regulação, mas somos totalmente apartidários, tá? Mas a gente tem trabalhado defendendo a nossa pauta de que o governo e a legislação devem permitir que a gente faça negócio de forma fácil, o Brasil seja um bom lugar para se fazer negócio, né? A gente, na realidade, o nosso foco é manter um ambiente inovador, ético, sustentável, dinâmico e competente, concorrencial, com facilidade de concorrer, não só nacionalmente, como internacionalmente, tá? O nosso objetivo hoje, ele começou um pouco diferente. Quando a gente começou a associação, a gente tinha que fazer existir. Existia uma lei que estava em tramitação em que, na prática, iria proibir a comercialização de milhares e milhares de software, de 90% do software. A nossa primeira motivação foi essa. Depois nós tivemos uma época que a gente tinha que fazer a evangelização sobre consciência de direito autoral. Então, a gente combatia os desvios no uso de software. Agora, a gente tem um lema de um Brasil mais digital e menos desigual. A gente está trazendo à comunidade todas as facilidades que a gente pode trazer como empresa de software para que mais pessoas tenham a cidadania digital. A gente está também trabalhando em capacitação de mão de obra, estamos com alguns projetos com o governo, agora com a mudança de governo, esses projetos estão um pouco stand-by. A nossa preocupação é que nós estamos sofrendo aquele apagão de mão de obra que está vindo aí sem muita visibilidade no momento de como resolver isso, ele só vai aumentar nos próximos anos, a falta de profissionais. Nós vemos hoje o profissional brasileiro, desenvolvedor, trabalhando em casa no Brasil, home office, recebendo em euro ou em dólar, porque foi contratado por uma empresa estrangeira. Isso faz parte do jogo. O que a gente precisa é formar mais gente, e mais gente, e mais gente, para atender não só a nossa demanda, como a demanda de outras empresas que vêm buscar recursos aqui. Nós temos um estudo de software, do mercado de software, que ele tradicionalmente é publicado todo ano, está no nosso site, é uma referência no setor, contando em detalhes como está se desempenhando e desenvolvendo e qual o papel do software brasileiro no mercado mundial. Isso é feito em conjunto com a IDG. Nós também atuamos no Pacto Global da ONU, em que das 17 ODS nós cumprimos 9 e somos hoje credenciados a portar o logo da ONU e parceiro no Pacto Global. Nós temos um movimento para redução de desigualdade, em que a gente, em parceria com a REURB, coleta equipamento de informática velho, ou até mesmo inoperante. A REURB refaz aqueles que têm conserto e distribui para comunidades carentes. O resto ela vende e paga uma parte significativa para que a gente possa investir em treinamento para pessoas que têm deficiência financeira, que não conseguem pagar seus cursos. A gente, então, atua nesta área, nós já impactamos mais de 2.000 pessoas com esse treinamento na área de tecnologia da informação. E nós montamos agora, estamos em montagem, recentemente, um centro de inteligência da ABES para políticas públicas, para que a gente possa, quando for ao governo, quaisquer que sejam ou setores, a gente apresentar não só aqueles 10 itens do que a gente gostaria que fosse feito, porque isso todo mundo faz, mas apresentar dados e apresentar, quando fizer a sugestão, apresentar sugestões de como fazer, de como implementar. Tá? Nós queremos, hoje já somos reconhecidos, mas queremos ser mais reconhecidos pelo conteúdo de qualidade ao apresentar para quem faz a política, tanto o legislativo quanto o executivo, né? Em serviços para associados, eu estou acabando, viu? Não é muita coisa não. Eu sei que tem coisa demais, dá para falar mais meia hora, mas eu estou selecionando. Em serviços para associados, nós temos uma das coisas que eu acho mais importantes, principalmente para o associado novo, nós temos 12 comitês e grupos de trabalho em que se reúne para tratar de assuntos afins. Por exemplo, nós temos a área do comitê regulatório, do tributário, futuro do trabalho, que discute as questões de futuro do trabalho, desenvolvimento de negócio, business intelligence, analytics, AI, o grupo de trabalho do e-social, porque o e-social, a interação com o governo é um capítulo à parte, complexo. Inteligência Artificial, Cybersecurity, compras públicas, para definir junto com o governo políticas de compras públicas de software e ajudar na implementação, a evangelização do nosso entendimento de como deve ser conduzido. Nós temos também um grupo de trabalho de LGPD, proteção de dados, e a reforma tributária. Nós damos suporte jurídico para os nossos associados sem custo. Não é que a gente vai fazer a defesa dele num caso que ele tem, mas a gente dá a orientação, a assessoria, tá? Mas também podemos indicar advogados se a pessoa precisar de alguma atuação mais forte numa defesa que ela tenha que fazer. Nós temos um programa, uma empresa ética, que nós damos treinamento para os nossos associados. Esse treinamento é gratuito e, se a empresa cumprir os requisitos, ela recebe um certificado de empresa ética. Isso está cada vez sendo mais importante, tá? Isso não era uns anos atrás e cada vez está sendo mais exigido e mais requerido, mais bem visto pelo mercado, né? Nós temos um programa de apoio à startup, que é o programa Startup Internship, o estágio, né, de startups. Nós temos um diagnóstico de GLGPD, que você entrando no site, você faz de forma anônima, portanto, é que nem confessionário de padre, você pode confessar seus pecados, que ninguém vai ficar sabendo, e quando você terminar, você não se identifica. Sai um relatório dizendo naquilo que você precisa mudar. Não é que a gente vai, se vocês quiserem mudar, a gente indica quem ajuda a fazer isso aí. Nós dizemos quão doente você está, fazemos o relatório para que você... Porque esse negócio de LGPD, quando você começa a entrar, você começa a ficar ansioso, né? Você fala, meu Deus do céu, quanta coisa tem para fazer. Mas tem mesmo, nós vamos ter que fazer mais cedo ou mais tarde, né? E um diagnóstico também na mesma linha de sustentabilidade. Tá? Muito obrigado. Paulo Roque, eu estou à disposição de vocês aqui e vamos prosseguir.
Muito obrigada, Paulo. A gente vai começar, então, a nossa programação de palestras, mesas redondas do dia. Vamos começar já em altíssimo nível. O nosso primeiro Keynote Speaker dessa edição é Barry Smith, diretor do Centro Nacional de Pesquisa Ontológica, professor da Universidade de Buffalo, nos Estados Unidos, e coautor do livro Why Machines Will Never Rule the World, Artificial Intelligence Without Fear. O tema da apresentação é a inteligência artificial centrada na humanidade. Depois da apresentação, a gente vai ter uns minutos para perguntas e respostas. Para que fique bem organizado, a gente pede para que vocês enviem as perguntas pelo nosso WhatsApp. O número, salvem aí, pessoal, é o 11 98844 3532. Não sei se está aqui na tela. Não está, né? Eu vou repetir, então, para vocês anotarem. É o 11 98844 3532. Vocês mandam pelo WhatsApp durante a apresentação toda, para no final a gente repassar as perguntas, fica mais organizado assim. Você que está assistindo a gente online, pode usar esse mesmo WhatsApp e pode também usar o chat que tem aí na tela de transmissão, tanto faz. Eu vou falar mais uma vez, 11 98844 3532, a gente conta com a participação de vocês. Vamos receber, então, aqui no palco, Barry Smith.
So, I must admit, I'm very impressed with Sao Paulo. I've given talks to hundreds of meetings around the world, and this is by far the most technologically impressive environment that I've ever experienced. And now I need to find my slides here. Now, I must apologize. These are rather pathetic slides in comparison with the fantastic multimedia performance that we've just seen. I don't have any music. I have very little color. Now, the question is, why am I here at all? I'm a philosopher. I come from England. The reason I'm here, I guess, is because of this book. And you can see there's a co-author. And the co-author, Jobst Landgräber, actually has much more reason to be here than I do. So he is a German AI expert who started off as a medical doctor. He then worked in bioinformatics at various levels, always with a mathematical focus. He then became a senior consultant in medical IT, and for 4 years he worked as the very first head of AI at the Allianz Insurance Company, which is the world's fourth largest insurance company. And they still use the software that he wrote when he established that division of Allianz. And then he founded an AI startup company, which you can find on the web. It's called Cognotect. And the first experiment that they pursued was to find a way of converting English text of a certain technical sort along a certain very narrow avenue into formal logical expressions which could be used to run computer programs. And he did this particularly in the area of car repair. And it was very successful, but it was so successful that the German motor company, and I won't mention its name, but you all know what it is, if they had installed his program in their car repair business, they would have had to fire 40,000 people. And you can't do that in Germany. Nowadays, he works primarily in what you might call mathematical AI consulting, and that's the main thesis of our book, that there are mathematical limits to what AI can do. Hence, AI without fear. Many of the things that people think AI can do, such as take away all jobs from humans, will never happen. And that's what the book demonstrates. And so why am I here? Initially we were coming together, but I did things myself, a lot of things in the years, always connected with computers, but always from a philosophical point of view. And all of these were applying ideas from philosophy to various different areas where computers were beginning to be used. And the result, the most recent result of all of this, is an international standard, which I authored. And this is the world's first piece of philosophy that was submitted to the ISO standards process, which is it's kind of interesting. So why would philosophy be of importance for biomedical informatics or manufacturing or the oil industry? So I've attended meetings of something called Ontobras, which is the Brazilian oil industry ontology meeting. Anybody who's interested in this, they can talk to me later. I'm talking today about AI. And so I'm going to start with AI philosophy. What do philosophers have to say about AI? Well, Alan Turing, you all know. And Alan Turing devised the idea of a Turing machine, which is a very, very simple logic engine. And a Turing machine allows mathematical formulae to be processed. And every algorithm on every computer which is executed by that computer is a mathematical algorithm. It's a piece of mathematics. And this will be true also when we have quantum computers. Every algorithm which is executed on any computer has to be executable on a Turing machine, which means that it has to satisfy quite strict limits. Now, the second piece of philosophy that I will just mention in brief comes from a man called John Searle, who is regarded as a John Wayne of philosophy. He likes to tell other philosophers that they're talking nonsense, which they very often are. He invented something called the Chinese room argument. I will give you a simplified version of his account, which actually repeats what I just said. So, software is always an algorithm which can be executed on a computer. It's a piece of mathematics. Actually, it's a polynomial function, but it can be a polynomial function which has billions, millions, billions, now trillions of parameters. So it would go much longer than this stage. And but computers can deal with very long equations. Now, an algorithm can't think. It can't fall in love. It can't become you so that you could be immortal in a digital web, live forever. All of that is nonsense. And So if some piece of software introduces itself, and says, I am conscious, that is not evidence that a machine can think. And anyone who thinks that is crazy. All right, so algorithms can't want anything. They're just pieces of mathematics. They're dead. They can't want anything. They can't be ethical or non-ethical. People can be ethical or non-ethical. They can misuse algorithms, but the algorithms themselves are just pieces of mathematics. And then they can't take over the world, which is part of what the book is about. Now, so this is the book again. Now you know everything. Now, but then there is another issue to all of this. So could it not be the case that we could write an algorithm which could emulate human intelligence, or love, or thinking, or willing? That's the real challenge. So they could never take over your identity. They could never be you, but could they emulate you? So maybe when you die, your relatives could get messages from what they think is you. It's not you. There's nothing up there. Actually, it's up there. Thinking, but it's emitting messages which reassure you that they're doing very well, thank you. Shouldn't we be impressed by all the advances in AI, and there really are impressive advances in AI, to believe that we're on a path to emulation, successful emulation? The book is about that. We cannot emulate human intelligence. So Elon is right about many things, but he's wrong about this. Very wrong. All right. So artificial intelligence has many impressive successes. It also has many not impressive failures, but people don't notice those failures. They just die. They leave the stage. The impressive successes we see all around us. So successes in pattern recognition. I'll talk about some of those successes in medicine later. Successes in playing games. In the AI software that showed that machines can beat humans playing a very, very complicated game, namely Go. That's an impressive success. And predicting protein folding, which is the most recent success of DeepMind. So human beings have attempted to create methodologies for predicting how proteins will fold to perform all the jobs that proteins perform in every organism for years. And DeepMind has overwhelmed the field of protein folding prediction in a very impressive way. So there's absolutely no suggestion that AI will not continue to bring impressive results. The thesis is that AI will never achieve that sort of wide-scope intelligence which is characteristic of human beings. So they can do narrow things. They can do narrow things in logic, in game playing, in pattern recognition. We'll talk a little bit about Google Translate in a minute, but they can never do the wide-scope things that human beings can do. All right, so let's talk about Google Translate. And we'll take translating Portuguese into English, but Google Translate deals now with more than 100 languages. I haven't tested how well it does with some of the minor languages. I've worked with Google Translate primarily as concerns translating English into German and German into English. And what we find when we test Google Translate is that it creates a very good, rough and ready starting point for understanding what a text is about. But if the text is in any way complicated, then you have to check very carefully as a human being. So you can't rely on it. It doesn't yield human-level, professional translation quality work. So let's think about what Google Translate is. What does Google Translate refer to? What is it about? What does it mean to say that it translates Portuguese into English? So what happens is that we take lots and lots of Portuguese text, pieces of Portuguese text, and we use software in order to translate all the words in these texts into long binary vectors. That means zeros and ones, strings of zeros and ones. In the end, all AI is about strings of zeros and ones. And we do the same thing for English. So we take a lot of text and we translate the words into strings of zeros and ones using pattern recognition. Google Translate does not understand the words. It takes the words as dead pieces of text and turns them into dead pieces of zeros and ones. And now you add the Google Translate algorithm, which again rests upon taking huge amounts of text corpora involving sentences and matching. And now you have a way of going from word embeddings in the form of Portuguese sentences into word embeddings in the form of English sentences, which we read then as translations. And again, there's no semantics here. The Google Translate does not understand the sentences it's translating. It's not based on logic. It's not based on meanings. It's based on patterns of zeros and ones. And it's amazing what you can do with patterns of zeros and ones. All right, now, this just repeats what I just said. Now, if you look at the ways in which patterns and zeros and ones are used for things like pattern recognition, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, you get all kinds of weird effects. So if you use it for image recognition, if it sees a bus standing upright, then it will say bus. But if it sees a bus rotated through 90 degrees, it might say cat or sink, because it doesn't think about what it's seeing. It just has certain patterns which it's translated into zeros and ones, and if those zeros and ones clump in a certain way, it will generate a corresponding word. But that word may have nothing to do with the image. All right, so the Google Translate algorithm, the last time I checked, uses 213 million parameters. It's a very long equation. Inputs to that equation are sentences in Portuguese, outputs are sentences in English. Now, what is happening here? What is Google Translate doing? It's not taking the Portuguese language. It's not taking the English language. It's taking a simplified model of the Portuguese language and a simplified model of the English language. Again, basically big, big, big boxes of zeros and ones and big, big, big boxes of zeros and ones. And it has a translator or a converter to go backwards and forwards between them. No understanding. And it does this with a very large number of parameters. Now, that's the only way it can work. It has to have zeros and ones as input. It has to have zeros and ones as output, because that's the only kind of input that a computer can absorb and do things with. It has to work with simplified models. I'll say this 17 times before we're finished. All right. Now, just a note, many people talk about explainable AI. Governments like to think that they will have explainable AI because then they will understand how the results of the AI system were created, and then they can be reassured that those results are somehow well justified. You can never explain the workings of an algorithm with 213 million parameters to a human being. No one understands what those 213 million parameters are doing. There are things you can do to interpret what AI is doing, but actually we believe that the best thing that you can do with AI is to test it. What you need is certifiable AI, exactly in the same way that when you have an airplane, you test it before you let passengers fly inside the airplane. So we need to have testing for AI. This would be a good working group for your society. How do you create certifiable AI? That's the gospel here. All right, so as I said, Google Translate achieves very good results, but it falls below the level of professional quality. But sometimes it falls below the level of ordinary human understanding. So there is this very famous example from Douglas Hofstetter. In their house, everything comes in pairs. There's his car and her car, his towels and her towels, his library and hers. Everyone understands this. When Google Translate this into French, it creates bad French, which every Frenchman would recognize is bad French. And if you put it back into English, you get bad English. So the point is lost. Now, you can find, and I have techniques for finding such problems in Google Translate, doing things which are perfectly good in English.
You must close the end of the stage.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, oh, got it. Sorry, you have to keep warning me. So, now, one of the reasons why you get these problems is because language is much more complicated than we like to think. So there is an American linguist, a friend of mine by the name of Len Talmy, who has pointed out that people who write software for language generation, and that's what Google Translate is, they very often ignore the very many ways in which, when humans use language, they take all kinds of contextual cues into account and all kinds of cognitive structures into account, which humans use spontaneously and without any thinking. So we are full of linguistic rules of which we are not conscious. And because we're not conscious of them, so AI engineers are not conscious of them, and so they assume that language is more simple than it is. And so this is just a partial list of 20 pages of features of language which human beings master without any effort, completely unconsciously, but which determine every single sentence that we speak. And I just mentioned some of them. So we'll take reality status. You all know perfectly well that I'm telling the truth, or anyway, that I am being sincere, that I'm describing something which really exists. You know that I'm not making a joke. You know that I'm not describing a fictional possibility. You know that I'm talking about a certain linguist called Talmy, who published a certain list, which is here on the screen. But no one taught you to make that distinction. The distinction was not conscious to you in your minds when you heard it. But that distinction is there, along with dozens and dozens of other distinctions, which explains why creating a smooth and effective professional level translation engine is impossible. But now, something which is even more impossible is to produce an engine which can deal with dynamic language. Google Translate deals with text, which is static. It's just there. You can collect it. You can study it as much as you want and then create results. You can't do that with dynamic language production because it's happening while you're doing what you're trying to do. So, spoken dialogue. There's a lot of material in the book about how complicated spoken dialogue is, how many different parameters there are, how many different variables having to do with context, where you are, who you're talking to, what your goals are, whether you're being serious, whether you want to control the conversation or whether you want to be controlled, how far you're willing to go in exerting force on the other parties into the conversation to exert your dominance, and so on and so on and so on. There are dozens of ways in which the context of speech determines A, what is said, but B, what is a human appropriate response to what is said. It's really hard. And now, it doesn't work. There is no good chatbot, even now after 50 years. And we all know this, every time we call our bank and we're put through to a computer, we are almost never satisfied. And the reason is that human language is much more complicated than what you can get when signing a contract with a bank to create a conversation engine for that bank. Google's conversation engine itself is very, very weak compared to Google Translate, which at one level at least is very strong. So, they've been trying to do this for 50 years. And our thesis is that they will never succeed. There will never be a good chatbot. Now, there is a Chinese chatbot. Actually, Microsoft produced it. They closed it down because it was beginning to express all kinds of politically incorrect ideas. But chatbot is called Xiao Ice, which is Chinese, I understand, for little Bing. And Microsoft was claiming that it was used by 600 million interactions over a certain period of time. Now, it was a chatbot which produced reassuring responses. And people apparently enjoy receiving reassuring responses. These responses were often repetitive, they were often empty, but still they served a kind of reassurance. That is not the kind of chatbot that would solve the problem of creating human-appropriate response in a conversation. Why not? Because when humans engage in conversation, they always want something. It is that want which makes humans pass the Turing test. Computers can't pass the Turing test, whatever people might tell you, because computers don't want anything. When they come into a conversation, they have no goals. When humans engage in conversation, they always have goals, even if the goal is just to pass the time while they're waiting for a plane, for instance. There's always a goal, and no one has found a way of capturing human goals, human intention, human will in a computer. And that's why humans will never take over the world, because if you're going to take over the world, you have to want to take over the world. All right, so let's have a brief summary of how machine learning works. So we want to have email filters, spam filters. And the idea is that we collect a lot of sample data, and the sample data consists of tuples, consisting of an email followed by a yes or a no, spam or no spam. So we're doing that all the time. Whenever we hit the spam button, we're sending a message, if we use Gmail, to Google to say emails like this are spam. And if we don't hit the spam button, we're still sending a message to Google saying this can go through. So we collect a body of sample data. And we use that sample data to train the neural net. And training here is just creating a gigantic polynomial function. It's always a polynomial function, which, when applied to the string of zeros and ones, which is the next email, will output the answer no spam, and then it will let the email through, or spam, and then it will send it to email hell. And so that's how a spam filter works. Now, authors of spam, as we know, are evil. Some of the most evil people in the world become authors of spam. And they will not rest until they have found a way round any given version of a spam filter. And so that means every spam filter software will become out of date. And that is characteristic of AI, that the sample data that you use to train the net are not going to be useful in a month or a year's time, because the world has changed, in part in response to the very success of your original spam filter. That's why you can't get rich on the stock market using AI. Because if you use sample data from now to write software to get rich, that will change the market. People will discover that you're doing that, and they will change their behavior, and then your software will no longer work. All right, now, in the Google Translate case, we were creating a simplified model of English and a simplified model of Portuguese. In the spam filter, we're creating a simplified model of what it is for an email to be spam. It's a model which doesn't take account of evil, it doesn't take account of human intentions, it just takes account of certain patterns of zeros and ones, because that's the only thing which exists in the world of AI. All right, now, I'll just mention that what AI does is a very special kind of mathematics. So in the olden days, mathematicians would work with pencil and paper, and a waste paper basket. That's important. Philosophers don't need waste paper baskets. They would use pencil and paper to write out an equation, and so there was a certain constraint on the length of an equation. But by using sample data to train a net, we can create polynomials with billions or trillions of parameters. It's still mathematics. It's still subject to all the limits of explicit mathematics, but now it's implicit. It's created by magic. All right. Now, so could Google Translate become better and better and better just by having more and more sample data? That's the common dream. Is it a matter of the size of the sample data which places limits? And by now you should be able to guess that this is not the case. Size doesn't matter. What matters is whether the sample data is representative of the entire target. Now, how do you get representative sample data? The sample data has to be representative of what comes next. A spam filter is not devised to capture the emails which you've already identified as spam. Its job is to capture all the new emails out into the future. It can do this only if it's representative of all those future emails. And it very often, very soon won't be, because those new emails are going to be there to try and cheat the spam filter. All right, so when can we obtain representative sample data? That only holds where the entire target set has a certain mathematical property. And that mathematical property is called being a statistical distribution. So the bell curve, the normal distribution, is the simplest form of distribution. There are many other forms. The forms we're talking about now are multivariate distributions. They have several dimensions along which the distribution occurs. But you have to have data with a distribution. And that's a statistical constraint on those kinds of data AI, stochastic AI, can work. Machine learning, in other words. Machine learning can only work where you have representative data, and that means data of a rather simple sort, as we will see. All right. So you have to have a distribution. This is a mathematical limit, and it will apply to all AI of the machine learning sort. And that's because it applies to all algorithms which need to be run on computers. So even if we were Facebook and Google and we had billions and billions of dollars to spend on collecting data, if we're not collecting data about a target which has a statistical distribution which enables representative data to be discovered, we will never create better software just because we have more data. All right, now, this is an old story about Jeopardy. So I assume that in Brazil you have some news about what IBM does with US TV and so forth. So there is still this game called Jeopardy, which is a question and answer game with rather subtle questions. And there are champions who win millions of dollars by winning Jeopardy. And so IBM took the challenge that it would win Jeopardy above all the humans who would try against it. And it turns out that IBM cheated. So they argued with the Jeopardy program, and they said they didn't want any questions involving puns or jokes or anything sophisticated like that would be newly created in order to really test IBM. The conclusion was that the IBM would be tested only by questions taken from the old stock, which is cheating because they're using the old stock to train the IBM computer. So there's something fishy going on here. All right, now, so what is it? Difference between those cases where spam filters and so on work and those cases involving jokes and puns and so on where the machine learning will not work. That there's something about this second collection of things which makes humans able to deal with them, where computers are not able to deal with them. Now, the answer is in mathematics. You can find the basis of the mathematics in this textbook here, and it rests on a distinction between simple systems and complex systems. Simple systems are, for example, the solar system, this device here, which I guess it's moving my slides. This is a simple system which we can predict its behavior through and through. It will gradually get old, it will have maintenance properties, but as long as it's working, it's a simple system. And complex systems never yield representative data because complex systems have too many variables, they have certain mathematical properties, which I'll talk about in a minute, which involve change over time of a sort which cannot be predicted. So all organisms are complex systems. The A Bolsa do Brasil is a complex system. The Paulistano language is a complex system. All human languages are complex systems. And I'll give you some more examples of complex systems in a minute. Now, so what AI has to do, in the case of Google Translate, for instance, is to find a way of modeling a complex system, namely the Portuguese language, into a simple system where we can create representative samples. That's always the goal. We always need to change the complex system into something simple. And we can't do that with thinking and willing, feeling, and so forth. We haven't found ways of doing it because we can't do it. We can't model those things using simple systems. All right, so the definition of a system is it's just a totality of elements which are interacting. And elements are physical objects that interact. And so we'll take the example of the solar system. The elements are the sun and the planets. And these elements don't change. And the solar system doesn't have subsystems. We could study the subsystem, which is the moon, for instance. But if we just take the solar system as the sun and its planets, it has no subsystems. A single human being has many, many subsystems. So this is a single neuron. And we have 100 billion of them. And they each have many, many subsystems. And it's different for everybody. So the patterns of neurons in every brain are different from those in every other brain. All right, so a human being has subsystems. But what that means is that we can view a human being as a system in its own right, or we can review the human being as an element of a system. For instance, you are all now elements of the system, which is this meeting. And maybe this device here is an element of the system, which is this meeting. And or we can see a human being as a system of cells, or a system of molecules, or a system of atoms, or a system of ions, and so on. So there are many levels at which we can view systems. But once we fix on a level, then we have our system, and we have our elements. So these are some examples of simple systems. Your computer, your car, as long as it's running properly, your phone. And in every case, the system behavior can be predicted just using logic and Newtonian mechanics, basically. And that's why we can write AI, which can manage simple systems. Indeed, we probably don't need AI. We can use simple Newtonian mathematics to predict the behavior of the solar system, for instance. We use simple Newtonian mechanics to build things like cars and even phones. Now, here are some examples of complex systems. So the Earth's weather system, climate system, seismic system, water system, your digestive system, the New York Stock Exchange, the Sao Paulo Metro, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant control system just after the explosion. These are all complex systems. You can't predict. Now, to say that something is ergodic is to say that over sufficiently long periods of time, the time at which any element occupies any given region of the behavior of that system will be proportional to the volume of the region. So a closed container with gas molecules is an example of an ergodic system. The gas molecules are moving truly randomly through every area within the region. Now, we are not ergodic. The weather is not ergodic. The climate is not ergodic. And that means that we can't predict the behavior of the weather or the climate. We can predict the weather within certain probabilistic zones within a couple of days, but we can't predict the weather. Now, these are all the properties of simple systems, including being ergodic. So a simple system has a fixed set of element types, a fixed set of interaction types. Here it's just gravity when we're dealing with the solar system. There's no force overlay, which means there's only one force which is relevant, namely gravity. And they're either in equilibrium or they're constantly converging towards equilibrium. And they have no evolutionary properties, so the solar system is not capturing other planets and it's not creating other planets by spawning them from itself. And it has a fixed boundary. Now, a complex system breaks all of those rules. In a complex system, we can have new element types. So take a family as an example. Suddenly you have babies. That's a new element type. You couldn't predict that. And then you'll have students, and you'll have, I don't know, mothers-in-law. And you have force overlay up the wazoo, as you see when you invite all the family together for Christmas. There are all kinds of forces which are changing the behavior of all kinds of participants in the party. And nothing is equiprobable here. There is no equilibrium state. The family is changing all the time because people get new goals which interact with the goals of the other members, particularly if you're married to them, and so on. We're always striving to do more things. That's why you're all sitting in this audience. That's why I'm here waving my arms. We are complex systems which have new drives all the time, which are not predictable. And we're not going towards any kind of equilibrium, leaving aside being dead. And again, we have evolutionary properties. We make babies, for instance, and there are no boundary conditions. We don't really know where the family ends. And all of these conditions apply to all complex systems. They apply to the Sao Paulo Metro, for instance, but I won't go into that example. So these are some examples of systems, and these are the 7 properties, and these are how the properties are divided. So practically everything in the complex area satisfies all 7 of these properties. All right. All systems manifesting these properties are non-ergodic, so the behavior of such systems cannot be emulated. To emulate, we need a simple system. That's why you can't emulate, and this is the argument. This is the argument that AGI is impossible. I don't know why this suddenly appears in bold type, but to build an AGI, we'd need a technology with an intelligence that is at least comparable to that of human beings. That's what AGI means, general intelligence of human beings. The only way to engineer such technology is to create a software engineering emulation of what goes on in our brains. And you remember, we have 100 billion neurons. To create such an emulation, we'd need a mathematical model of this system that enables prediction. It's impossible to build such a mathematical model, which I just showed. And The human neurocognitive system is a complex system, therefore we can't create a software emulation, therefore AGI is impossible. That's the argument of the book. And we think this argument is analogous to the argument which shows in physics that a perpetual motion machine is impossible. And somebody might say, well, the laws of physics might change, and in 10 years, if Elon moves to energy generation, he will probably say in 5 years' time, we will have a perpetual motion machine. He would be wrong. And similarly, if someone were to say, Elon was to say in 5 years' time, we will have artificial general intelligence, they would be wrong. All right. Complex systems never allow representative samples. You just can't use stochastic AI to create emulations of complex systems. And I think I'm going to stop here. So every self-driving car is a simple system. The road network in São Paulo is not a simple system. In order to emulate the road network in São Paulo, you have to create a simplified model. That simplified model will always be out of date. Now, you can try and solve that problem by resampling and creating a new simplified model of the São Paulo traffic system, but you'll always be out of date. There will always be traffic features that you haven't taken account of, and that is the end. So can you hear me? So if I keep putting my fingers in my ears, that's because I'm listening.
Ok. Olá, estão me ouvindo? Olá, pessoal, tudo bem? Eu sou Silvia Bassi, publisher da The Shift. É um prazer ter todo mundo aqui. O professor Barry acabou a palestra dele, porque ele fica preocupado com o horário, então eu vou tentar continuar aqui um pouquinho a conversa, porque tem alguns slides para lá ainda. Professor, ficou claro pela sua explicação que não é possível replicar os sistemas da forma como a gente imaginava. Portanto, a IA generalista não chega ali. Mas a gente teve, no começo do ano, uma discussão sobre o engenheiro do Google e aquele computador que parecia que estava contratando um advogado e parecia que conseguia conduzir uma conversa extremamente interessante e senciente. Aquilo era um mecanismo extremamente bem treinado?
Good. So something which I didn't talk about in the talk was the degree to which artificial intelligence works because human beings are involved. So I'll come back to your lawyer example in a minute, but let's take another example. DALL-E is an artwork generating software or graphics generating software, and it produces very, very impressive graphics. But if you actually use DALL-E, you will find that if you write your phrase, which you want to be represented graphically, the first time the graphic results will be rather boring and routine. They'll be insipid. But so what you do is you tweak. You're a human being. You tweak your phrase in order to coax DALL-E to give you exciting graphics or original graphics or creative graphics. Now that tweaking is a human process. DALL-E can't do that. So it's human beings who are responsible for the creation of something which would be part of a complex system, namely non-routine, non-predictable, rather than a simple system. Now, with regard to the lawyer, I'll give you another example. When DeepMind created AlphaGo, which is the AI software which beat the world Go champions, some of the old masters of Go are reported to have said that they learned new strategies from AlphaGo. That, in other words, that AlphaGo was creative. It created new strategies. But that's actually a misleading picture of what really happened. What really happened was that AlphaGo created hundreds and thousands of new strategies, 99% of which were boring, routine. They were strategies which led to them winning a game, but not every strategy which wins a game is creative. The 1% or 0.1% or 0.01% of those strategies which were creative are precisely the ones identified by the Go masters because they were human beings and they could recognize creativeness. Machines can't recognize creativeness. Now, with regard to the lawyer, I imagine that if we tell the story correctly, which means in the way which supports my argument, then we would discover that it's humans who are doing the creative work in that picture and not the software.
Ok. So, já ia falando inglês aqui.
Yep. Yep. Oh, yeah, good.
Pessoal, se alguém quiser mandar pergunta, é só mandar pelo WhatsApp. Eu estou com ele aqui do ladinho. Ok? Funcionando? Ok. Eu queria que você tocasse um pouco mais na questão do exemplo do carro autônomo, porque a gente ficou um pouco no meio do final. O carro autônomo consegue ser plenamente veículo confiável?
Okay, well, first of all, it would be impossible for it to be fully reliable. Human beings make mistakes when they're driving cars, and there are accidents caused by human beings. And it will always be the case that self-driving cars will make mistakes and accidents which are caused by machines. Mm-hmm. The problem is that when a machine causes an accident, it's much more problematic than when a human causes an accident. And that's for several reasons. One, we find it reassuring that a human is at the wheel. Another is that we can hold human beings responsible because human beings can choose.
Closer to the mic.
Where algorithms, we can't hold them responsible. They can't choose. They don't have a will. So I remember driving on a quite safe road behind a driverless car in California. I felt really weird. It didn't feel right that there was a car immediately in front of me that didn't have a driver. So the criterion that the engineers of self-driving cars are working towards is not perfection. It's something like 10 times safer than the safest human driver. And the safest human driver is an older lady. So that you want to be 10 times safer than an older lady driver. Now, can you achieve that? Probably, for a time. But then situations might change, and you're going to have to be constantly retraining the software in order to reach that level. 10 years ago, I gave a talk at a meeting of the American Society of Safety Engineers. It was about the safety of driverless cars. Everybody in the room, and they were all working on this problem of self-driving cars, everyone in the room assumed that they would be out of a job within 5 years. Yeah. Because they thought, well, 5 years, that we will be done. 10 years later, they're, if anything, further away from the goal than they were 10 years ago. Certainly the optimism level has dropped considerably because people are discovering all the hitherto unrealized complexities involved in human driving, just as the Google Translate people are ignoring the complexities involved in human language.
Muito bom. Vou fazer mais uma última pergunta. A gente sabe que daqui para frente vai ser impossível imaginar que a gente vai ter só uma IA boa, porque a gente vai correr o risco de também ter uma IA ruim, ou uma IA má. né? Da mesma forma que o código é produzido por diferentes pessoas. Como é que a gente tem que fazer para avançar, para ter o máximo possível de IA boa, e se há uma definição, né, de IA boa, o que é uma IA boa versus uma IA ruim, para que a gente consiga eliminar o máximo possível do bias e dos riscos de ter uma IA ruim.
Good. So there are several interesting questions built into that. First of all, I don't think you should talk about good AI and evil AI or bad AI, just as you wouldn't talk about good guns and evil guns or bad guns. So it's not the gun which is evil, it's the owner of the gun which is using it to do evil things. So people will perhaps be able to use AI to perform evil deeds. I think that the book has some reassurance. Certainly, it's reassurance that you won't have to be afraid of AI taking over the world autonomously, just as there are no. In order to take over the world, you would need to want to take over the world. I've said this already. Now, how can we have some assurance that we're going to have AI which is not biased? Now, I think I've already mentioned this, but I'll mention it again. And in fact, my co-author, Job Landkleber, has an article on this topic, which is called Certifiable AI. So we need standards of certifiability, and those standards of certifiability will include standards for sample sets. And the sample sets, they are a well-studyable object. So they are always a simple system by definition. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't have strong software-driven controls on sample sets which can rectify issues of bias. But the key is to focus on certifiable AI. In other words, AI which is certified to be useful for a given specified purpose, rather than unbiased AI or morally or ethically good AI. They are misleading ways of approaching the problem. And I think that I don't have anything more to say on that topic. I think that probably covers the topic.
Ok, pessoal, depois do almoço a gente vai ter uma discussão muito interessante sobre Certified AI. Só convido a todos a voltarem do almoço, porque vai ter uma discussão bacana. Temos aqui 3 perguntas vindas da plateia. A primeira, você acha que com a evolução da sociedade, da tecnologia, em algum momento será possível que os sistemas que consideramos complexos hoje se tornem sistemas simples no futuro e, portanto, replicáveis?
Good. So this is a good question, and I think I have a good answer, which is why I'm smiling. So if the cover of the book has a picture at the bottom of what is called turbulence. Turbulence is a phenomenon which is realized everywhere where you have water flowing into another body of water, or when you smoke a cigar, for instance, the way the smoke will rise. These are examples of turbulence. When you play a trumpet in a certain way, you get a certain kind of tone, which is a mark of turbulence. Turbulence is probably mathematically the simplest kind of complex system. And mathematicians have been trying for decades to solve the problem of turbulence so that they could show, that they could demonstrate that it's a simple system. And Kolmogorov, who was a great Russian mathematician, in the 1940s thought that he had solved the problem of turbulence. He had an equation which worked, but then some of his friends showed that it didn't really work. And so everybody gave up, basically. The idea that you could show that turbulence is a simple system doesn't work. And so Kolmogorov would tell his friends, when I die, I will have 2 questions for God. The first question is, how does relativity theory work? The second question is, how does turbulence work? And then he said, and I'm pretty sure he will have an answer to the first question.
A outra pergunta aqui, nem se a gente chegar na computação quântica, factível, claro, porque a gente ainda está com ela muito instável, ainda assim não será possível fazer emulação?
Yes, so this is another good question, and actually I was talking to Sylvia earlier. She is involved in a complex process to try and track advances in AI, if I'm not simplifying too much. I'm involved in a counterpart project trying to track advances in quantum engineering generally, quantum computing, but also quantum sensors, other kinds of quantum technology. And if any of you in the room are interested in this topic, they should contact me. So quantum computers are, first of all, they are still very much in their infancy. We don't have mature quantum computers. What we have is expensive toys. But we will, sooner or later, have real quantum computers. And they will be able to perform Turing machine algorithms much more quickly, fantastically more quickly than current old-fashioned non-quantum computers. But they won't be able to perform any other algorithms. They'll only be able to execute exactly the same algorithms as are executed by existing computers. So there's no change in the limit of what we can find representative data about just because we have quantum computers.
Isso é interessante, porque o computador quântico, ele pode resolver problemas que o computador tradicional não resolve, mas é uma questão de complexidade e não uma questão de emulação da forma do cérebro humano, é isso? Não adianta ele ser capaz de fazer milhões de processamentos, porque não vai resolver o problema da complexidade.
Yeah. So the one interesting area where we can be optimistic that quantum computers will be able to solve problems that existing computers can't solve is cryptography. So passwords, cracking codes. Quantum computers can solve those problems, but so can existing computers. It's just existing computers might take 10 years, where a quantum computer might take 10 milliseconds. And that means that there will be, in the next years, an arms race between the West and the adversaries to build quantum computers for purely cryptographic purposes. They each will be trying to crack each other's passwords. So passwords will become longer and longer and longer. But that's not doing something which couldn't be done by an existing computer. It's doing something much more quickly than we could do by means of an existing computer.
Fantástico. Tem duas perguntas sobrando, eu vou mostrar para ele depois e eu vou pegar de quem foi e eu peço para ele responder, porque só não queremos furar aqui o horário, porque tem gente online. Professor, muito grata, obrigada por ter aceito o convite, eu fiquei muito feliz de ter aceito o convite e de ter vindo para o Brasil. Gente, o avião dele atrasou ontem, ele passou a noite no aeroporto. Então, ele não vai conhecer São Paulo. Conseguiu chegar aqui de noitão. Professor, muito grata de novo.
Thank you.